Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, if you can believe this, there is something called legal corruption. I know you won't believe it, but stick with us and we'll explain all of that to you. But first, how about, let's turn to education. A graduate program that works beyond high school, the linkage between the two, an important subject that applies to all of us in Pennsylvania. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a variety of topics today. We're going to talk about political corruption, legal and illegal, with a couple of folks from the caucus. They've done some great reporting on this subject. But first, every now and then we have the folks from Milton Hershey come in and talk about their programs, particularly as it can apply to others in the state, to other schools. And there's increasing interest in what do you do in the transition from high school to college or to vocational school or to whatever happens after high school. It's extremely important as we change the workforce needs, not just in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but all over the world as well. Joining me to talk about that is Tanya Barton. She's the Vice President for Graduate Programs for Success. That's a division at the Milton Hershey School. Tanya, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be with you today.
It took me a long time to get to that, but we're finally here. At any rate, you run a program called Graduate Programs for Success. Broadly speaking, how would you define that?
Well, we start very early on. We believe in that tight connection between pre-K through 12, higher education, technical programs, and the workforce as well. So you're exactly right. It's how do we partner together between all these different groups and stakeholders to best meet the needs of the students in our Commonwealth. Yeah,
and I mean, the linkage between one and the next step, like we go from preschool to kindergarten, then, you know, grades 1 through 12, and then whatever is going to happen. But what do you find? I mean, as a college professor, what I find is that the workforce needs are changing dramatically.
Absolutely.
And how we get young folks to think about that. I don't think you need to think about it in kindergarten.
Sure.
But, you know, and where they go and what they do. That involves a good bit of counseling as well as programming. We'll get to the programs, but how important is that counseling along the way? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's absolutely essential. I was a middle school principal, and I think that's about the right time that students are starting to explore their own strengths and interests. So I think that's the essential time where you can start discussing those things with students, getting them to understand what do I like, what don't I like, and providing them with those opportunities. But having a very strong college and career advising program, I think, is essential for most schools. Yeah. We started in 8th grade at Milton Hershey.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, and you know, in the public schools especially, there's always this huge, you know, what programs do you offer, what courses can you put into the curriculum, and then you got the money thing. But long term, it's hard to think of anything more important than the transition. And that's what you've developed at Milton Hershey with a university. We'll get to that in a minute.
Sure.
That nexus is extremely important, and I don't think it gets anywhere near the attention it should.
No, I completely agree. And oftentimes the conversation in pre-K through 12 is, you know, what college are you going to go to? What are you going to major in? But I think that conversation has to be more broad. What careers are you possibly interested in? Knowing that's going to change. But you want to make sure that you are providing a differentiated range of opportunities, whether that's technical school programs, certification programs. Oftentimes students don't know what's all out there. Apprenticeship programs, I know are the new buzz, they're old, but those are conversations you have to expose students to.
A lot of folks come into college and they're not certain what they want to do, which is why you'll take general education requirement, liberal arts, you know, education. Not just through 4 years in some cases, but the first couple until you get your bearings, until you know what you want to do. That's not uncommon. Yeah. So if people get into college and aren't certain, I'm not saying everybody. We know people want to be doctors and lawyers and engineers, but there are a fair number of people who don't know. All right. You have an arrangement that you worked out with Shippensburg University, which is one of the 14 public universities in the state. Why is that important?
So with the advent of our new division, so essentially you're looking at elementary school, middle school, and high school. So what we've decided to do was not just stop working with our students at the time of graduation, but making sure that we're helping them persist. Because the students at Milton Hershey School live with us, it's much more like family. So because they don't have family members helping them through that, the majority are first generation, they're low income.
That's great.
They don't know how to maneuver that process.
That's a great point. All right, we're going to continue with this discussion, particularly about why it's important to get these partnerships, and something that all schools could, and I know some schools have, we're not criticizing schools, but it looks like the wave of the future. We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Tanya Barton is with me. She's with Milton Hershey School. We're talking about a program, Graduate Programs for Success Division. They've established a linkage. Obviously, we talked about this in the first segment of the program with Shippensburg University. How's that work?
Pairing with Shippensburg was wonderful. It was our first university that we worked closely with, and we were very excited. That was one of our PASHE schools. We worked throughout the year together, establishing what it is that students need. Again, first generation underrepresented populations. Yeah. They did a great job explaining what are the different supports that they offer on their campus, and then we decide how do we plug into that most effectively. So whether that's through the admissions process, assistance with financial aid, support programs on campus, having key stakeholders there to assist was very helpful. So it takes that theory and it translated actually into action, which is just wonderful.
That's a great point. I mean, more colleges and universities in general are recruiting first-gen students,
Correct.
students, that wouldn't have the financial resources to attend college, working hard on that. I know at F&M it's a major priority of our college. All right, what are the support tools that are necessary to provide first-gen students? I was a first-gen student, by the way, but that was, I think before the American Revolution took place, but go ahead.
No, and so was I. And it's not an easy task for any student, especially, like we said, students who have never gone through this before, don't have the parents to assist them through that process. At the Milton Hershey School, we actually hired some transition support specialists. They visit the students on their college campuses, help them find those supports and navigate those supports in person, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then introducing them to the proper folks. Our students sometimes are hesitant to reach out to people that they don't know, so making those in-person, face-to-face introductions I think is helpful, and then showing them the different things on campuses that exist that can help them when our transition support specialists aren't there.
Yeah, that's great. Now, there are other steps that schools can take to initiate. Now, obviously many schools have experts. You've done this already. So you have it up and it's being implemented. So other steps that schools could take?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we found extremely helpful, which might be of interest to you, was a texting software platform that we started to implement. It was very interesting.
You mean students would text?
Absolutely. So we wanted to plug into that. It was interesting. We had students who didn't have all their financial aid paperwork done. About 60 students.
Wow.
30 kids we sent an email to, letting them know you need to complete all this paperwork. The other 30 we texted. Within 24 hours, we had all of their problems solved and completed.
Gosh.
And the students with email, we heard back from one of the 30 saying, what is it that I need to do? So that was just one tool, plugging into understanding the students that you're working with that we found to be helpful.
Yeah. So now, do you think you have a program with one school. Is this something you might expand, diversify, reach out to other schools, or does that get too complicated?
Not at all. July 11th, we actually held a partnership event, and we invited multiple schools across the state of Pennsylvania. PASHE schools included private schools, technical schools, and that allows a diverse selection process for our students. So we're looking to work with approximately 30 to 40 schools.
Oh, wow. When did you start this program?
The program started about a year and a half ago.
So it's been underway and you've had some chance to evaluate it, and it's obviously you made a decision, you're going to keep it and expand it.
Absolutely.
Look, please come back, and let us know the progress. I want to get in with you to gee, we have 30 schools. How is that going to work, and how complex?
Absolutely, we're excited about that.
But I guess that's why we have these things now and the way to communicate.
Sure.
All right, this comes under, can we really believe this? Legal corruption. How does that work? We have a couple of experts, journalists, expert journalists, I should say, are going to come in and help us out.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, this is hard to believe. There's something called legal corruption. I never heard of that before, and we have a couple of people that are going to come in and help us explain that. Brad Bumsted at the Caucus. What's your title there?
Bureau chief.
That's what I thought. We almost called him the executive editor. We don't want to get him into trouble. And Paula Knudsen, she's is an investigative reporter with the Caucus. All right. First of all, Brad, I'm going to ask you the lead question, but explain to our viewers the Caucus. What do you do? I have one of your editions here, which I'll hold up. What is this?
This is a print-only publication. It's not available online, although you can go to caucuspa.com to read about how to get a subscription. But it's an investigative report that comes out once a week on state government.
All right. I'm sure, the terminology, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and when we talked about legal corruption, I had to think a little bit. Define legal corruption.
Well, it's things that may be unethical, but not illegal or subject to criminal prosecution.
Improper? Would that also be
that would
improper?
Fit. Right.
All right.
So I can give you 3 examples.
That's why you're here.
Let's start with the long practice in this state of walking around money, where grants were given secretly divvied up by legislative leaders and handed out to loyal lawmakers.
Right.
Those have since morphed into a couple different categories, but most recently result in earmarks in the fiscal code that one cannot tell what they are when you read them.
So they get a gift.
So they give out money without being transparent about it. Campaign contributions. Pennsylvania is one of only 11 states where there are no limits on individuals or political action committees, and sometimes that gets abused. Sometimes people give money for good reasons, just as a thank you note to people who agree with them. But sometimes, and I've seen it, there'll be contributions right before a vote or contributions right after a vote. Draw your own conclusion. And there's probably not even an agreement among the legislator and the group, but it's understood.
How widespread is this, Paul?
Well, Brad talked to some professors who are actually studying the concept of legal corruption, and they've been looking at this. They started it at Harvard, and they've been looking at it for 3 years. They're actually going into their 4th year. So
they're doing it all over the country, and including PA. Is that it, Paul?
That's right, and it's enough of a phenomenon that it's all across the country, and it's enough for professors to field an entire study on it.
And one interesting point of what they've found so far for Pennsylvania, and this is a study based on perception of journalists, investigative reporters, and others who cover state government. The Pennsylvania General Assembly ranks highest of all the branches of government without, it's not even close. There are 5 on a scale of 5 in this survey, 5 being the worst. The executive branch and judicial are like 1.5 and 2.
Yeah. So but Paula, these practices have been going on. These aren't new. I mean, it's not like suddenly there were. The campaign finance law has been that way since forever. We have very weak ethics laws or practices, as you know. Brad has written about dozens and dozens of people who were guilty of illegal corruption. None of them censured or reprimanded by a single ethics operation in either chamber.
Well, one of the things it looks like they're trying to get at here is trying to understand the full scope of corruption. And again, they're calling it legal corruption, but when studies have been done in the past, it's really been geared toward the U.S. Department of Justice prosecutions, which doesn't take into account state attorney general's prosecutions or local district attorneys' prosecutions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most of the charges against state lawmakers and other public officials historically have been done by the feds, and that's not everyone, to be sure, but what's your sense of that?
I think that's true, but I think that to your point about this has been going on a long time. Of course, if you go back to the late 1800s and the Gilded Age, I mean, you're looking at historically Pennsylvania political system has been abuse of state contracts to raise money, for campaigns, particularly in the presidential area, and patronage, illegal patronage sometimes, nepotism and that sort of thing, and payoffs to get a job. So that goes back a long way, but it doesn't make it right.
Yeah, we're going to run to a break. I remember a time when if you went into the House of Representatives and there was a bar, and lobbyists and others, observers were stood behind it, but there were powerful lobbyists representing powerful interests who were on the floor.
Pennsylvania Railroad was one of them.
That's right.
Oil company was the other.
They were on the floor of the General Assembly intermixing with what? The lawmakers, right?
They had permanent desks on the floor, according to Franklin Curry's book.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the subject of moonlighting. We'll do that after a break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Welcome back. Well, I'm talking with Brad Bumsted and Paula Knudsen. They're both with the caucus. I have here a paper in front of me. It's one of their editions, and it says, I'm sure you can read it. I'll get my fingers out of the way. Moonlighting. Moonlighting's not illegal?
Of course it's not illegal. But here's
What's wrong with it?
Here's the situation. We have a 253-member General Assembly, and their whole reason to be is that they are a full-time legislature, yet about half of them have outside jobs. And the way this story occurred was that Paula was driving at one point, and she looks over and sees a sign that says Rothman Real Estate. She wonders who that is. Is that Greg Rothman, the state legislator? Looks it up. It is his company. And not long after that, he was sponsoring a bill on the floor that dealt with the real estate industry.
Yeah, take it.
So we came up with in this story a list of different legislators who have outside income. And like you said, it's not illegal, and it's a practice that has gone back for many years. In fact, we talked with one law professor who said, look, there's nothing wrong with this. Many, many years ago, when most legislatures were part-time, this was a way for legislators to supplement.
90% of lawmakers in the 1960s, when the evolution in the 60s and 70s, when Pennsylvania became a full-time legislature, listed another job because the legislature was part-time. You couldn't live on the salary, so they worked.
But now you can live on the salary. Some would argue not so well in Philadelphia, but you can live on the salary, and you get great perks and benefits and health care and a car if you want it. And so there are some who argue that, well, if we are full-time legislators, we shouldn't have outside income. One of those being Tony DeLuca.
What about this question? The issue, it seems to me, is whether they get themselves into a conflict of interest.
Correct. Whether
they know, they're a law, and let's be honest, most Pennsylvania lawmakers are honorable, decent people. We're not going after, we're not having this discussion to impugn the ethics or the morals of everyone in the General Assembly. Most of them are very fine, good, upright people who are trying to do the best. Okay, having said that.
So we tried to look into the question of, many of these outside interests are businesses. So whether it's a lawyer, a truck driver, a truck company owner, funeral home owner, ice cream shop owner, it covers the gamut in the legislature with their outside interests. So we tried to look into it to find out if someone has one of these businesses on the side and they vote on a bill on that subject matter, is that a conflict?
Is there a nexus with the job and on legislation that they're either directly handling or voting on?
That's called recusal.
No,
right. But
So we called both the House, the Senate. I mean, we went all over to try to talk to folks and find out, do legislators recuse? And what we found out is in most cases, the Senate and the House rules do provide for a conflict of interest, as does the Pennsylvania Constitution, which is explicit. And it says that legislators shall not vote on a matter in which they have a conflict, a pecuniary conflict. However, it happens. And in fact, we found instances in the record where in the Senate president directs a senator who has just said, I've got this conflict, you must vote.
My son works in the Attorney General's office. You must vote because you're a member of a general class.
We found one instance.
On an issue involving Kathleen Kane's removal.
Yeah, but does that make any sense that if a lawmaker stands up and says, I have a conflict here, I don't want to vote?
It doesn't make any sense.
I mean,
that's more, that's la-la land sometimes,
We found one instance where a senator's mother...
I'm shaking my head because I've heard this.
A senator's mother was being appointed for a state job that would have a $58,000 a year salary. And he said, my mom is getting the state job. We have to vote on it. It was a Senate approval. You must vote. There is no conflict. You must vote.
And the Constitution says directly otherwise.
So it was a really interesting issue to work on.
Yeah,
I know.
Don't look at me. I can't.
No, I'm not. I'm a little flabbergasted that you can't recuse yourself and just say, I don't know. Maybe you'd walk out of the General Assembly. Maybe you just walk off the floor and go back to your office.
You could take a powder, but why should you have to do that? You should.
Yeah, you're right. You should be able to honorably be able to stand up and say, I have a conflict of interest. I was not involved in this legislation at all. I am out of it, and that's right.
And I talked to some legislators who have been here 32, 34 years, and they say on some occasions they have been, able to recuse, but most of the time, vast majority of the time, no.
And the other thing we found was really interesting is that neither the Senate nor the House keep records of these conflicts.
Yeah. All right, we're out of time. This was an earful, I think. I mean, a lot of folks out there, I'm sure, not aware this is going on. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.